go ahead and get started since it's already a few minutes after 1. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining our call today. This is the Global Shelter Cluster NFI Practices Working Group. So if you are not here for the Global Shelter Cluster NFI Practices Working Group, hopefully you enjoy the meeting. So my name is Renee, and I am here with my co-chair, Pablo. So I am hosted by UNHCR from the Global Shelter Cluster team, and Pablo is hosted by IFRC for the Global Shelter Cluster team. So we will be taking care of chairing arrangements. I am now sharing my screen, so I hope you all see today's quick presentation that I'll introduce the topic for today. However, I cannot see the chat at the same time due to the way this team structure works. So today's agenda is that I will run through a quick overview of what was discussed in the last meeting. And again, many apologies as there was a lot of momentum after our last meeting, but due to a number of initiatives that are now ongoing in the Global Shelter Cluster, we were not able to have a meeting in March as we had previously planned. So thank you very much for making time on this April day. I'm so glad that we could pull off the working group, but yes, indeed, there was a little bit of a gap, but as mentioned, a larger team, we're balancing many opportunities. Please mute. Yes, we are balancing many different activities. So country support, we have several other working groups, and then you'll hear later today from Miguel about some new exciting projects that will be useful to you at Shelter Cluster partners. Then I'll review some of the points from last meeting just as a recap. And then also I will share with you in our last meeting, we did a kind of Mentimeter poll where we were asking people for what their priorities are for this year. So I'm going to share some of those brief results. I mean, it was a very brief survey, but then also based off of the results of the survey, I'm also going to share some possible ideas for the future of the NFI working group. Then we have several very interesting presentations today. So one is going to be from an initiative called the Emergency Supply Prepositioning Strategy, and they're going to talk about a platform that they're working on, and they're also probably going to ask for your contributions as NFI working group partners for feedback on that. So then also we'll have a presentation as a way to kind of facilitate delivery of NFIs, but also liaison with the logistics side of the house in terms of procurement and classification of NFIs. Then Mandy is going to present some of the results and some of the initiative that was mentioned in the last meeting about the Sustainable Packaging Initiative for NFI packages. And this is quite an issue that is dear to the Global Shelter Cluster's heart as we're trying to reduce the use of single-use plastics since 2019. And then this topic has come up many times in the working group. And then, as I already mentioned, Miguel is going to be presenting on a new grant that the Global Shelter Cluster just received that has many synergies with the topics that we've been discussing in this NFI working group, including on energy, NFI types, etc. And then I also put a point of AOB. Many of you have contacted me with many interesting things that you're doing, so I also want to give the brief moment for the floor, but as you see, we already have quite the packed agenda today. Okay, I'm going to run through the action points, and then Pablo, if you could help me in kind of moderating the chat, or like if somebody can speak up if it's relevant to you. Basically, yes, so the action points are please subscribe to the NFI working group page. We'll take a brief look at how that's working a bit later on in the meeting. But if you subscribe, it means you'll get all updates that we're sending out in terms of news. So I just sent out earlier kind of a recap on some new resources that are available on the Global Shelter Cluster webpage that partner agencies have created or that country level clusters have created. So we send out regular updates through the working group, and then if you're subscribed to the web page, you can easily receive those resources. Partners were also asked at the last meeting to provide their feedback to the survey on the list of priorities for 2021. So that's done, and I will present to you what the feedback is. Then, based off the presentations that we saw in the previous meeting, so Amy, she's not here today. Her regrets because there was another conflicting schedule, but I have provided the contact information in the previous meeting minutes, so please get in touch with her to discuss any synergies that you might have with your agency program. Then there was also a request by IOM and the colleagues from NORCAP that are working on energy indicators. So Adam and Mice, they gave a very interesting presentation, and then we shared with you the framework for feedback. So I was wondering here to provide an update on that point, if they're looking for feedback or. Okay, no feedback. So that maybe will be discussed. We can reach out to them for you and find out what the status of that is. Then UNHCR and FCDO to exchange details about testing of fire retardant plastic sheeting. Is Amar or Phil want to update on that action point?
Thanks, Phil here. Amar and I have indeed been talking, and I'm able to share a shortened version of the test results that FCDO commissioned on fire retardant plastic sheeting. I think there's a possibility now that events have overtaken us, and there are a number of other sort of developments in the pipeline in terms of FR plastic sheeting. But if anyone would like that, just I don't know, Renee, how would you like them to let me know? What's your preference?
Okay, so this one you can't publish yet, or you can publish?
I have a shorter version, like a summary version, which can be published for operational use by members of this group, but it would be better not to disseminate it more widely afield, if that's okay.
Okay, because yeah, one normal way that we're normally sharing things is through the website, but then also I can just give your contact details again, and then partners can contact you directly, probably for that guidance.
That'd be perfect. Thank you so much. Over from me.
Great. Thank you for the updates. This was also similar. UNHCR, yes, to share with the NFI. They were going to advertise for a project manager for Innovation Norway project. We never received that, but we're still happy to circulate the TOR if that's still ongoing. I don't know if Amar or Francesca or somebody wants to update on that.
Sorry, Renee, because Amar couldn't attend this meeting, I don't have an update, but I'll ask him to be in touch with you, and then maybe the update will be provided with minutes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Then, yeah, please, we can follow up with him also, and then we're happy to disseminate that through our networks as well. Yes, so then also this is relevant to today's topic, but basically partners were asked to consider sharing any NFI specifications that they have with the environmental community of practice. Kelly, I don't know if you've received anything, but also we can discuss more about this during Miguel's presentation if useful. No responses. So I guess we'll discuss that later in the meeting. And then lastly, the NFI group was working with the environmental community of practice on the shelter and settlement. That's still outstanding on our side. As I mentioned, there were many different activities going on with the Global Shelter Cluster in the past months, and that hasn't really progressed, but please contact myself or Pablo if you would like to help us in taking the pen and bringing this paper across the line, because it would be very helpful with some of these themes that we're discussing. So, all right. So as a result of our last meeting, we did this Mentimeter poll, which kind of selected some options which people thought were key for the NFI working group. So we have disseminated through the Shelter Cluster website a collection of feedback in terms of what are the priority. Sadly, though, we only had 6% of partners who are on our active mailing list respond. So that was some 10 people. We have quite a wide mailing list, but also for the number of people that have been attending meetings, 10 people is quite a small amount. These were the rankings of the priorities that people contributing to that poll responded with. So the top item is this defining new packages for NFI kits. So this is particularly for different situations. So like defining what is a COVID-19 kit, replacing some of the traditional bulk items that we procure maybe globally, and procuring them, at local levels with local materials. Flooding that is also impacting situations where maybe the cluster is activated for a conflict context, but then they have to adjust their modalities to more natural disaster ones. There are some examples in the best practices links that were sent out about some of those issues, so you can also look at how some countries are dealing with that, but this is also going to be a bit about today's topic. Then environmental impact of NFIs, reuse, recycling. This one is going to be a big theme during today's meeting. So I trust that we'll come up with good ideas of how we as a working group can support country implementation. Then also needs assessment monitoring was also very high. And then of course some themes ranked a little bit lower when you think about only 10 people responding. Even though it was 10 people, more positively, the majority of the people said that their agency was able to contribute resources and learnings to these specific topics. So I think that shows at least positive engagement by 10 people. So those are some of the results of this short survey for what could be our working plan in 2021. So now we'll stop with the screen share. Due to this low participation survey, Pablo and I were also reviewing how the working group could work going forward. So one idea that we had was, because the NFI working group is ad hoc manner, our meetings, we haven't really been able to regularize them due to the many conflicting priorities, the emergency situations that happen. So one idea is to convert this working group into a community of practice, which basically the website would give us the ability to do that. So it doesn't mean that those topics that I just presented we won't be able to address, but it might mean that we work in a more ad hoc fashion. And those of you that responded positively that you're willing to contribute to those issues, maybe you could meet in smaller working groups of this community of practice. And then already you can see, if you go to our webpage, you yourself, you can subscribe to the mailing list. So all you have to do is to put your mail, and then you can subscribe to the site without an account. And it means that every time that we issue a news feature or a update, we upload an interesting document to the website, that you'll get a notification to your email about it. Or if you're subscribed on our Shelter Cluster app, which you can find in the smartphone application store of your choice, you'll get an update about what's going on with the page. Or you can actually create an account, and then you can subscribe to the NFI working group, but you can also subscribe to any of the other practices. What's also really nice is that we now have this kind of discussion feature. So what this also creates the possibility to do is that it will basically create a forum where you as partners can regularly participate in the conversation. So for example, if somebody said, oh, I would like to find this fire retardant specifications, then people can go on discussing that issue through this discussion app. So basically, if you're logged into the website, you can go to any of these topics and look at what they are and say, oh, I would like to understand more about this first one on the Iraq position paper. And then if you're logged in, you could actually respond and then request more information, or you can say like, how did you come up with that, etc. Or you can say, oh, this is a really good template. I would like to be in touch with this country cluster so I can make a similar template for my organization, etc. So this would be also, it would not mean that we get rid of the NFI working group meetings, but it would mean that since we're already meeting in a more ad hoc fashion, that we could also lessen the interaction, or that one of you as partners could call for a meeting on a specific topic. So this is also one possibility for the working group. I don't know, Pablo, if you want to add anything on that?
Yes, just perhaps to reassure everyone that moving from a working group to a community of practice doesn't mean for the participants a massive change. It's not like we're going to stop doing things, but it's just better, the kind of issues that are being raised in this working group, sharing practice, sharing experience, finding out about ongoing initiatives, is just better suited to a community of practice. The Global Shelter Cluster structure has working groups to address a particular gap, to deliver a specific output in a time-bound period, and then be solved. And we feel that this working group has been going on for a number of years. It was first established with a particular purpose, but now the conversation is interesting. The conversation continues. There are a lot of initiatives and interest around NFIs, but obviously there is no necessarily a time-bound pressure for the working group to deliver a specific output that has been endorsed by the SAC. So it's just simply adapting what we're already doing to the structure that was created for this purpose, really. There is a space to continue the conversations. We continue to have meetings. There is a space for everyone to initiate within the community of practice a dialogue on a particular topic, and those interested will engage. It's just using the tools that we have at our disposal more appropriately for the purpose of the group in the way it has evolved over time. That's it. Really.
Okay, great. So now I would like to see if anybody has any reactions to that proposal. I opened the floor up to any discussions, any reactions or any questions on how the website is working, how the community of practice would go forward. I do not see any reactions. Okay, well then perhaps we can also send this out for a poll, or we can see when planning the subsequent meetings. All right, so now we are going to hand this over to our main speakers for today. Yes. Chuck is just writing in the chat. Sorry, I need to adjust. So it says, yes, it works well if you had a lot of diverse things to do. Yes, that is a good point, Kelly. Yeah, the community of practice, like as you can see in the NFI working group, we have a lot of different initiatives ongoing. And this also will enable, you know, for example, if you're interested more in the environment side of NFI packages, then you can create a small working group or even a small discussion through that web platform. And then also outside of the working group, if somebody wants to meet with me to better understand how the website is working, because these are some new features that we as a Global Shelter Cluster have worked in, and then we've received the support of many donors and contributors to this website. So we want to make it as easy as possible for you guys to coordinate. And so I'm happy to also spend time with any of the partners here to learn how those features are working and how you can join the conversation. And it might make it a little bit easier so that when you guys want to continue the conversation and then you're hoping that Pablo and I initiate something, when maybe we have some emergency going on in some country, you yourselves can go to the discussion, and there's a feature where you can email the NFI working group page And then once your email is approved by us, the conversation can start going. So, but this also requires you as to be active participants in that. So happy to also meet with anybody interested in that later. And we're also rolling out these features in the cash and markets community of practice, which was newly created. So there will be a lot of synergies there. All right, so now let us turn over to our main speakers. So our first topic is kind of on the classification of NFIs and the specific packages. So I would like to turn it over probably first to Florent to present the this emergency pre-positioning and supply management initiative, and also to consult with all of you on in terms of classification of NFIs. So Florent, if you want to share your screen and speak, I let you do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. All right. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. I had a first meeting with the shelter cluster with Ella and Pablo and a few weeks back, and I'm glad to have this opportunity. So I'll try to keep it short, not go too far into the detail. ESUP stands for Emergency Supply Prepositioning Strategy. In a few words, the purpose of the project is to bring people to discuss when they do prepositioning. As we know today, many organizations preposition. How many actually consider what the other do in terms of prepositioning of item and quantity? We know that it's not many. So there's a lot of gap and duplication, and the purpose of the project is to try to have something more coordinated, collaborative, and a bit more coherent in the way we're prepositioning at national level. You can see on the screen the steering group is composed of those organizations. So we have quite a few diverse range of deciders on the project. So in a nutshell, the idea is we propose two things. One is what should be an optimum stock in country based on the last 40 years of disaster and the stock report available. And that gives you a direction as to where you should go collectively for all your prepositioning item. And this is not specifically shelter. Once you have decided, or when we can propose an optimized version of a strategy, it's good to know where you're actually starting from, because you may already have some gaps or already have some duplication in many items. In order to have this first starting point, which is where are you from, we have developed this platform called Stockholm. It stands for Stock of Humanitarian Organization Logistic Mapping. And just before joining it, I was in discussion with the government of Madagascar because we are going to start implementing it there. It's a very basic platform. You can see the result of what we've done in Nepal last year, coordinated by the logistic cluster. And basically what you see on the map is a selection of filter on the left. You can select by cluster, by item groups, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, by country, by agencies, etc. And depending on your selection, you see on your right a stock report, which tells you how many of the item you have. Now, I'm going to go too far into that because it's quite logs directed. But one of the things that I want to talk to you about is this item group you see on the stock report on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side at the top left corner. Now, what is this item group about? What we're trying to do is, you guys know much better than we do how complicated it is to standardize. And here we're not talking about standardizing the specification. I heard you were talking about fireproof plastic sheeting, etc. We're here to try to facilitate the standardization of how we call a cat a cat. So you all know this question about plastic sheet, plastic sheeting, tarpaulins. And on a logistic matter, when you try to compile those information in stock report, you end up with 20 lines basically referring to the same thing. And because they're called differently, we can't bring them together. What we've done here on what you see on the screen is that we've created an item group. where you can call an item whatever you want. You can call it standard tarpaulin Federation standard 4x6 with no eyelet. But then when you register it, you have to register it under what we've called for now tarpaulins. That's the name of the item group. That gives the capacity to people at national level or above, looking at a bigger picture of what's the situation at country level, not to get bogged down into details and to have to scroll to 25 lines of item to try to understand what is the quantity they actually have in tarpaulins or any other item. In order to define those item groups, we developed a first prototype when I was in the Pacific. And we created these item groups, and in order to get them, let's say, validated or endorsed or making sure they were making sense, we contacted at the time the regional cluster coordinator for shelter, wash, logistic, and a few others, so that they could give us direction about what would be the appropriate naming for these groups. And I will come back to that in a sec. So the functionality is to standardize the nomenclature about how we call a cat, therefore facilitate the collection and the aggregation of the data, and therefore facilitating the extraction of reports. It doesn't prevent the input of the detail at the local names or whatever you want to put. As I was saying before, you can call it whatever you want. It just has to be registered as one of this item group. And the reason we are I'm presenting that to you guys today is because in our perspective, that decision should not stay with logistics. We're here to facilitate a process. We are not here to make those kind of decisions, which we have partially made so far because we need to get the project moving. But at this point, we believe that should really rest with the people in charge, in that case, the clusters and you guys, which is why I'm presenting that today. I also want to say that while we're engaging discussion with you about this standardizing the name, the nomenclature, we're having similar discussion with other initiatives more or less connected to that question. Frontline Human and Logistics with NetHope and Microsoft, the Universal Logistics Standard, although they're not specifically looking at nomenclature, the HUM data, the impact project about customs because of the HS code and the fact that they need to have a standard names. Anyway, so just for you to know that this is a discussion we're having with different partners. And obviously, in the wake of this discussion with the shelter cluster and you guys, we plan to have similar discussion with the WASH cluster, the education cluster, etc. So at this point, you can see on the screen the item groups that we defined with the first prototype we had that was based in the Pacific at the time of we put that in the Pacific. My counterpart was a good friend of mine called Robert Dodd, which I'm sure you guys know. And so we came with this way of categorizing the item in order to keep a high perspective, which is interesting. You can see we have tarpaulins, we have sleeping mats, we have blankets, we have shelter toolkits, for instance. And we try to describe or to make a list of what should fall under those item groups. So for tarpaulins, you can see it can be 6x4, 5x3 with eyelet or not. It can be called a plastic sheeting or etc. For blankets, you can see it can be the high thermal, the locally procured synthetic, fleece, woolen. It can be a local name like a bed sheet or whatever it is. It's registered under blanket. So that would give the national authority and the people in charge the capacity to have an overview of one item. And if they want to the details, they can also, if you look back at here on the platform, you can see something here called include column. And here you can access an extra column where you can get all the detail if you want them. When I look at your website, because I've done my homework, I see that we have a few things in common, which is a good start, like blanket, that's called blanket. But I can see that on some others, like what we have called kitchen set, are referred to on your webpage as cooking sets most of the time. So I've put this one in red because here we have a clear difference. We can see that plastic sheeting, when we have called our item group tarpaulins, and I've put this one in orange because that comes with other discussions, for instance, tarpaulins in shelter, but we also have tarpaulins for the wash cluster that they mostly use in roll for their latrines that they tend to call plastic sheeting. So maybe there's a bit of a difference per cluster here, but the idea would be to find a common name, at least within the shelter cluster, that for the moment we call tarpaulins. We have a similar question for jerrycans. I see you call them jerrycans, but we have been advised before in the Pacific to make a more generic term that would be less tinted. We know that jerrycan has some historical meaning as well, and we decided to call this water container in the wash cluster, for instance. So it's not jerrycan, it's water container. And for our mosquito net, they're called mosquito net, so I think there's no issue there. But in our case, that falls under the health cluster more than the shelter cluster. So you can see with that, we have similarities. We're talking about the same thing, but we're calling them slightly different. So by showing you that, what's the purpose of this presentation is to give basically come to you to check your interest into being part of that. As I said, as for we are now, those item group names have been defined by ourselves and on the basis of the work I had done in the Pacific before. But since we're moving that to a global platform, our intention was to give the opportunity to the global coordinator, in that case you guys, to take a part of it. What it would require in terms of workload if we are moving forward, not a lot. Probably an initial revision of the existing item group, like I showed you. It probably can be done through an hour or two workshop, I guess, to clear the main ones. And probably nothing more than an annual revision once a year, about a few minutes, because once we agree that a tarpaulin is called a tarpaulin or a plastic sheeting, that's what it's going to stay. So the revision will be mostly to include any new items that we saw emerging, like we saw in the last few years with the communication device, etc., that became more prominent and needed to be referred to as an item group. So that wouldn't require basically a lot of work. If in the shelter group, in your group, there is an interest to be part of that process or to take the lead on that process, which would be our favorite option, what would be required? Well, as I said, a workshop to revise one, to revise existing item groups to see which one we keep and which one we need to change, so that we would change it actually into the platform. Then we would give you an access to the platform so that whenever you see a change or an item that need to be added as an item group, you could do that yourself. And then there would be an annual revision and potentially a discussion with some other cluster when we have items that could be fitting into both, like the mosquito net or the water container we saw before. And in case, despite this fantastic presentation, you guys are not interested, then ESOPs will just maintain the existing item group as we have them. But our preference would be to have the technical specialists having their say in the process. So that's an opening, an invitation for you to take a part in that process. At this point in time, that's not really more than that. And that's it. I think I stick to the 15 minutes.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any reactions or questions? Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a small question. Are we talking about prepositioning in country, in like specific country, or are we also talking about regional prepositioning, or both?
Yeah, very good question. So the approach of the platform is a bottom-up approach. So we start at national level, because what those information will tell us is what existing into the country, but also what the optimum stock they would like to have to cover 75, 80, 85% of disaster in country. And that will inform the gap that should be covered by regional bodies like the Federation, like the UNHRD, etc. So we plan to capture those information, but the information at regional level will look at a complement of the national capacity rather than a response capacity in itself, which is what they've been designed for. So yes, we will capture those information, but the analysis will be done as how can this complement Nepal, for instance, rather than how it can support a response by itself. Does this answer the question, Sarah?
Yes, and so so you mentioned Nepal, but was it already done in other countries or just in Nepal?
We've done a pilot in Vanuatu a few years back that would need to be redone now. We have done a pilot in Philippines, and we are in discussion to refresh the information. This one was not published. We've done the first one in Nepal by the end of 2020, and we published a report on that, which is accessible on the website. So you can see the analysis that was done per item at national level and per different clusters as well. So you have a section on the shelter cluster items there, if they are enough, not enough, in the right location, etc. And in terms of way forward, our countries that we have for the target in the coming year are aligned with the countries defined by the logistic cluster preparedness unit, because once we do the recommendation, we need to make sure there's a structure in place that can coordinate the implementation. So the coming countries are mostly in Asia, because in order to have this regional perspective, we need to have enough national information. So that will be Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. Madagascar for Africa as a starting point, with whom we already have engaged. And in the Americas, we have triggered the process for Colombia, Honduras, and we may have a discussion for Haiti and the Caribbean.
Thank you very much.
Great. So it sounds like a lot of the countries are in the natural disaster context. So what about the conflict side of things?
Another very good question. For the moment, the analysis we provide are based on natural disaster. The very simple reason for that is that we know the sharing of information as stock can be sensitive for good reasons. And so we have already had a lot of concern expressed by the partner. So we've put functionalities in place that will allow organizations to hide some of the information around their location or the names of their organization, etc., allowing the quantities and stock to be available for the analysis of what could be optimum and what's their current situation, but not displaying sensitive information about location and names. Before we roll that out into conflicts that are into areas that are specifically more sensitive because of conflict situation, we need to test it out on something which is by nature a little bit sensitive security-wise. That's why we start with the natural disaster process. There's a plan to roll that over globally later on, but we need to test it out first on those questions of sensitivities.
Okay, thank you for that. I turn it over to any other questions. I think a good way forward is probably we can have some agencies or countries that can contact Pablo and I, and then if you're interested, particularly from the natural disaster, in contributing to this platform, then I think we can put you in touch with Florent, and then when I think it gets to the conflict side as well, then we can also pinpoint maybe locations where maybe it's a little bit more stabilized than others, or if you are approached by some partners in the logistics cluster who want to try a certain conflict context, then maybe that also is a possibility. Any other questions or reactions? And just
there's one in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to answer that one, and last comment for me after that, is the shelter cluster in Nepal owned this app and using it? I can't answer that question for a simple reason, is that my counterpart is a log cluster. So what they do is that they've coordinated with all agencies who have stock in country, and they share the stock with us, which includes the shelter stock. So I haven't been specifically in contact with the shelter cluster in Nepal. I have been a little bit because I've met a few people and I know they've developed a system on their own over there, which I can't remember the name, but we've been discussing about how to connect that. But I generally collect the stock from the logistic department because they have an overview of all the stock from across all different shelters. So directly through the shelter cluster, no, but do we collected the shelter cluster information? Yes. And the last point I wanted to make, I'm happy to take any more questions, but I need to leave the floor to my colleagues after that. The purpose of this presentation is really to see how much at the coordination level, so at global level, at you guys level, how much are you willing to be involved into this role of taking a part in deciding what the name should be of the item group. That's really what this presentation is about, so that you have a say in that rather than letting logisticians do that when we are not specifically specialized on that.
Yeah, and I think also what we could do, Florent, is share these classifications that you presented. So it'd be great if you could share that presentation with me, and then I can also share it out to the group for their reaction so that they can have more time to look at it after the meeting. And perhaps we can even do a survey as an NFI working group to review those classifications, because I think that's one of the main themes that we've been looking at, is like ensuring that NFI working groups are meeting their functional use, not just distributing items, because that's one modality. There is a question from Sarah that is interesting, but then I'm conscientious of time, so I'll let this be the last question, and then we'll hand the floor over to Claire. So question on will the focus only be on English names or other languages?
So as a start, yes, because we need to start somewhere, but it is planned to have a translation of the entire platform, not only the naming of the item group, which in itself would probably require a separate discussion, because sometimes the translation of some of these names can be complicated and require a discussion by themselves. But initially it will be in English. We will do a translation of most of the key languages in English, Spanish and French, to start with. Being French myself, I think I can handle at least one part of it. And then after that, if we stumble across very specific issues on the naming, the idea would be to refer back to you guys if we have engaged into those discussions for the English part, to see what should be an appropriate name in French and or Spanish.
Okay, great, thanks. And I think this also has some synergy for the Shelter Cluster website. I think the Promoting Building Standards Working Group has worked a little bit on the IEC materials and the typologies. And then with that, it's also the translation of these different typologies for Shelter and NFI and document types. So I think that could also be interesting down the road. Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Very interesting presentation. And then those action points I'll circulate to the rest of the members. So thank you so much. Claire, now I turn the floor over to you to present the Solvoz initiative.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation before. It was super helpful as well. I'm not sure if you can see and hear me.
Yes, we can see and hear you.
So my name is Claire. I am the founder of the Solvoz Foundation and the Solvoz Platform. And I didn't prepare a large slide deck, just a very quick story, and then I'll show the platform what we're doing. But what Solvoz is all about is an open access catalog based on purpose-led needs and offer solution packages, which is integrated with a procurement workflow, which is a whole long line. I presented this to René and the NFI working group, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then René asked me to present today what we're doing, because we are to start an NFI working group on the platform. Yeah, and I'm just very excited. What we have already is some sort of a dynamic kit builder, and it ties into the part of the work that has been presented before and on the work that I've been seeing on the website and discussions I've had with, I think, even some of you in this meeting, but definitely a lot of field practitioners. Solvoz is set up by all humanitarians. We're all coming from field operations. The majority of us coming from an MSF background. But let me show you the platform. So this is the platform. It's already live on solvoz.com. It's you can browse through categories and browse through use cases. But first, the website itself, you can spend or waste your time like you do on LinkedIn by just browsing through high-level categories or see the last solutions that have been added to the catalog. The aim and the audience is specifically users from smaller and medium-sized NGOs, and that's good to keep in mind because the majority of the large UN organizations and the large international aid agency might have their own catalog already. However, there might be a benefit in collaborating and sharing knowledge. The structure of the Solvoz Foundation is really about open access knowledge, like a Wikipedia, but with neutrality, so there's no brands and makes, etc. There's no advertisements on the website, just as a general background. So how can you use the platform? Imagine you are to organize a mass fac for COVID. Let's make a very tangible easy one for now. We started an NFI of a mass vaccination working group, so there are some solutions already in the platform. I can search on vaccination sites. The working group started 2 or 3 weeks ago, so there's only a few that are currently public, but there are more solutions coming as we speak. Here I have some simple criteria that are relevant for the solutions for this vaccination site. Just open one of those solutions, which is a kit for 1 day for 1,000 people and the equipment you need. It has a general description. It will give you the source where it's coming from. And it gives you all the products, including the quantities you need. And if you're after scaling because you need 2,000 people, it's obvious you need 2 of those. Each of the kits come also with pre-requirements. So there's this staff required. We all know there's allergic reactions taking place at a small percentage, so you need to be prepared so that we have an adverse events kit following immunization. If you select it, you'll see that solution package as well with all the items. We also have a sanitation working group, which started I think 2 or 3 months ago, so they're already operational for some longer time. What we do is we have high-level categories, but we are searching from a purpose-driven perspective, so from the use cases. So let me zoom in waste management, which is underwater sanitation, and let's go to medical waste disposal. Then you will see this is the use case, medical waste disposal. We have multiple solutions here, and you can then browse through the category and add criteria. Maybe it's for sharps, and then we only see there's 2 still out there that are relevant. If we open these packages, and then again, for us, a solution package or a kit, oh, this is a bad example I'm seeing. No, Ashbit. These are combinations of services, products, and designs. So here it tells you how to build it, and it also tells you of all these items, how many items you need. Going back to NFI for now, I quickly opened the MSF catalog and just built one solution or one kit based from the standard MSF kit, because we have over, I think, 10,000 products already in, standardized products. And again, they come without a make and a brand. So it describes the product, and you can easily start building these items to your kit. So I took the hygiene kit from MSF. I added the description and just modified the solution. I can even continue modifying it right now. So you can take a base kit and adjust the items. Maybe you're not after a binder and they shouldn't be in. You can just simply delete it and make it your own kit. And that's also why I'm talking and why I'm having the opportunity to talk today to all of you, is that we have the basics of the dynamic kit builder in place. Behind what you see, there is a lot of algorithms ready, and there's a very complex database system behind it. So each product can be classified in multiple different ways. So from the procurement side, we have CPV codes added to each single product, but we can also just match these to the UNSPSS codes or GS1 if that's required in certain countries. And we also classify it related to the use cases. So there's multiple levels of classifications. And what we're after as a next step is having the ability to start scaling solution packages and kits, so that you have a kit, maybe it's for shelter, you know it's you're after a tent, but the type of flooring depends what kind of quantities and what kind of items you need. So that's then our next step, that you can start selecting from your use case and that you have the ability to start scaling these kits up and down, but also regarding demographics, the number of women or the percent of women or children or the age group of children depends what we are giving out in kits. So that's the next step that we're after. And that's why I'm thrilled to present today, because, sorry, I have my kids around that are now going to interrupt me, excuse me. So that's what I'd like to do is we are to open the NFI working group, and I really like to invite you to think with us. But what's the value from this step? If I pressed the wrong button now. If this is the kit that I'd like to add and like to procure as well, I can add this to my basket. and I'll go to my procurement basket. Sorry, now mine is slow. Maybe I need 1,000. And I'll save. And I can see this now in my tender preparation area. I will see all the items that are in, and I can launch the tender on the Solvoz tender platform. What you have seen up to now is a free catalog. So this is all free to use for everybody all around the globe. We are publishing currently everything in English, but next step is Arabic, Spanish, French, and Swahili. I can create my tender. Now, I won't bother to go through all of these, but what it happens is that you can define if it's an international or a national or local tender or request for quotations. And then international or local or regional suppliers are automatically invited to bid and send in their quotation. And the platform itself doesn't make the decision. It's always up to the user to say, all right, for these items I go with this supplier, or for this entire lot I go with the other supplier. And you have comparisons, and you can go off system or keep in system if you'd like to move towards contracting. But yeah, I won't go to all the details. And if there's anybody who wishes to have a more elaborate discussion or more elaborate presentation, I would be happy to do that. But since I'm super conscious of time and I want to stick in 10 minutes, I'd like to open the floor for questions.
So yes, you already have quite a few in the chat. So yeah, one question that was first observation that was done was about, you know, the catalogs of humanitarian donors. So I think one, so Joseph is observing that yes, IOM, UNHCR, MSF, UNICEF, USAID, everybody has their own kind of specifications, but then linked to, so how does this platform, you know, add value to those already existing ones, I guess is one question. And then the other one is that catalogs of these major agencies are often incomplete, especially for larger items. So the Igor has listed out windmills, micro concrete roof, tile machining, etc. So some of those more detailed shelter items that may be overlooked, or basically machinery that can build shelter items. So those are the first two observations, and then we can get to some of the other chats that would do. I'll let you answer those kind of two observations first.
So I'm going to read through them as well. So what we're doing is we're combining at this moment existing catalogs. So there is often a lot of things are mentioning the same, or items with a different quality standard or different size standards. What we're doing, if I'm taking a very simplistic example of a generator, we don't say Yamaha generators or Honda generators and the name and the brand with it. What we do is describing a generator with the outputs and the defining attributes of that specific generator. Then it's up to a supplier to bid with a make and brand. So that's one component. And then the second thing is, with the product definition and the attributes, we incorporate standards, quality standards, as well as the sphere standards or ULS standards can be incorporated to products or to services, because we also see that services should be treated equally as a product, to combine them into packages. And then, yeah, the donor requirements, those can also be incorporated into that whole system. So if it has a microphone on. For us, donor requirements can be criteria. So if you're after mosquito nets, then the requirements of USAID can be a criteria. So if it's an applicable criteria, we can add those, and then you can filter through the mosquito nets requirements, which are part of which donor requirements. Does that answer the question?
Joseph, does that clarify for you?
Sorry, I'm just about to run. Yeah, I'm happy to talk more. I think there's a lot of work's gone on in specifications on interagency basis, and I think if you look at them, they're very detailed for good reasons. The most successful ones are all tied to LTA processes, so not to tenders like most of the big agencies would do multi-year tenders for the key items. This is the big, you know, the main NFIs we procure. I think some it's probably dangerous to be promoting stuff which, like mosquito nets, which aren't following WHO procurement processes. I think it's dangerous to be promoting them because they're ineffective or flawed. And in terms of the procurement, say you take an item like tarpaulin, a really good example. It's been developed over nearly 25 years. The specification is incredibly detailed, but also it's linked to systems of factory inspection, sharing of supplier data between major agencies. So I'd be nervous to see some of these promoted and random suppliers promoted through a platform without this rigorous review of them, because I think, you know, we've all been in the field when bad tarpaulins turned up and it's a waste of money, waste of resources, and frankly, people don't get the shelter they need. It's the same for other key items too, like splitting jerry cans. So I think there are a lot of very critical items I'd be really nervous to have just on a random database, unless they've gone through a rigorous pre-qualification process, which I don't see here.
Yeah, sorry, then I misinterpreted your question. You're absolutely right. And that's also, we have double validation before anything adds to the catalog. So you can add your own catalog. We're not responsible for a personal catalog, but if we're going for the mosquito nets, we add all the criteria that are justified, that are proven by the WHO to the bed nets. Then it's up to a supplier, if they are to offer their bed nets on a bid, they have to put in proof that they are abiding all the rules and regulations and the requirements of these bed nets. Also, all the suppliers currently in the catalog are validated suppliers by either UN or NGOs. So we went through, triple checks are taking place. On the solution sides, there is always a product and a domain expert who is validating before anything adds up in the community catalog. And then there's also a validator on the methodology in use. And then on the suppliers, there are checks and validators, and you will also be notified if there are suppliers that have not been qualified, or you can also select if you only would like to have validated suppliers.
Okay. Yeah, and then conversations can continue.
Maybe it'd be good to discuss later, because I can see some real dangers in this. You know, like if you look at a tender process for an agency, it's a 6-month process, including factory visits. So I think we really need to be careful what's being promoted, and there's big risks in this.
Okay, there are 2 other good questions in the chat. Tom, could you say your question? I'm not really sure what you're asking. Tom? Okay, maybe that question could be addressed later. Mandy has a really good question on environmental sustainability criteria information included in the platform.
Yeah, we are currently adopting several environmental criteria. What we're doing is that we don't have an absolute figure. We have the standards that need to be applied. If that's relevant, they only show up products that are abiding these rules or these criteria. And then ultimately we are developing an algorithm, or they are currently developing an algorithm to measure the sustainability criteria, environmental sustainability from solutions compared to the others, which are currently on your screen. So there will be a comparative rating, but not an absolute figure. But that's a long story. I'd love to take that one.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, no, so there's a lot of good points there, a lot of things to be discussed, so maybe that can also continue in a subsequent meeting, and then also to follow up on the action points. So now, as Mandy is appropriately appearing, I'm going to hand over the floor to for her to update us on the Sustainable Packaging Initiative, and then also recent accomplishments in the LSE study that went out.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? And I will just share my screen. Can you all see my presentation?
We can see your screen, not the presentation. Yeah, there we go. Now we see the presentation.
Now you can see the presentation.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Great. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for having me today to speak a little bit at this meeting. I am the team leader for the Joint Sustainable Packaging Initiative, and I'm sort of contracted via USAID's Environmental Compliance and Operational Support contract. USAID being the organization who's sort of coordinating this multi-stakeholder initiative. It was great to see the survey results that you presented, Renee, earlier, where environmental impacts of NFIs came quite high up on the list of priorities for this year for this working group. So that was great to see. So I was hoping today just to tell you a bit about this initiative. Many of the partners in the initiative are present on the line as well, which is great. So some of you may know a bit about this already, and then discuss some potential areas for collaboration where our work may overlap as well. So just by a quick way of background, so this is very much a collaborative effort. We have about 16 partners involved so far in a steering committee and a technical coordination working group. You can see them all listed below. The Shelter Cluster Environment Community Practice has been very active in the initiative so far, and we've been talking with the cluster about potential areas of overlap with other parts of the cluster's work as well as this one. So yeah, essentially the idea behind this initiative is to try and capitalize on the many ongoing efforts that are happening across the sector to improve packaging and reduce packaging waste, and also a lack of coordination on the topic that we noted. I think there's really an opportunity to increase our impact and find collective solutions when we work together on this topic. So this initiative was co-conceived with USAID and WFP and the logistics cluster back in 2019. I did present on it at last year's shelter cluster meeting when it was sort of just kicking off. We conducted a scoping study, which has informed the planning of the actual activities that we're now kicking off. We have been through a fairly extensive joint planning exercise. We had a workshop in November for that, and then produced a subsequent 4-year log frame and activity plan, which is based on the scoping study, partner priorities, and the joint planning process. We met to kind of validate this in February, and activities have kicked off in March with different organizations leading the different activities and multiple organizations participating in each one. Their USAID funding for the next kind of year of implementation has just come through now in April, which is great. So USAID's role in the initiative is focusing on a lot of the coordination, communications, policy, kind of support services side of things, as well as leading on some technical activities too. And we just had our first technical working group meeting last week. So I wanted to talk to you about a few particular activities and the progress that's been made on them so far. If there has been any, bearing in mind we're sort of just starting activities at the moment, and see where we might be able to coordinate. This is just to give you an overview of our kind of log frame / results matrix. We have two main outcomes. One is focused on the coordination piece. So as I mentioned, noted the lack of coordination on this topic. We like to try and make a difference to that. So this is kind of the first outcome is looking at the kind of advocacy, communications, technical coordination, etc. And the second one is looking at the operational side. So looking at the strategic and operational application of packaging circularity to try and minimize negative impacts, and also importantly to try and increase opportunities, livelihood opportunities, etc., where packaging doesn't necessarily need to become waste. So that's looking at packaging data and evidence. How can we improve procurement specifications and potentially standardize them? Looking at the improved design, production, and distribution of packaging. And then, of course, how packaging is managed at the end of life end of the spectrum. So the color coding here is the green activities are the ones we're kicking off this year, yellow next year, and red thereafter. More or less, this is shifting a little bit depending on our partners' priorities. So I'm not going to talk you through all of it, obviously, or we would be here all day. But I've pulled out a few activities where I think this group might be interested, where potentially you have already done work on this, your organizations or as the cluster. Yeah, so I'll just present, I think there are about 7 or 8. I'll just talk through them quickly and then it'll be good to get your feedback. So on the policy and advocacy side, and just to say, please stop me at any point if you have questions on these specific ones as we go through, or pop the questions in the chat. Policy and advocacy. So the UNEP OCHA Joint Environment Unit is going to be leading on putting together a guidance note on international and national policies governing plastic use. So the idea would be this is like a quick, cheat sheet type thing for the main humanitarian context, looking at single-use plastic bans, which of course is very relevant to this group. What are some of the Basel Convention regulations on transboundary movement of plastics, etc. So that's something that might be of interest. That'll be starting very soon. Then we are setting up a technical coordination and information dissemination platform to share technical information. Noted in a recent discussion with other members of the cluster the need to coordinate across not only organizations but also across sectors and to share information on technical activities. Obviously, there are quite a few similar initiatives that are spanning across shelter, logistics, etc. So we're hoping this platform possibly will be hosted by the logistics cluster, pending funding to update the existing platform. So watch this space. On the data and evidence side, we are looking to conduct life cycle assessments of the highest volume packaging items / most commonly delivered items. This is something that obviously we are very much aware of the work happening with the cluster, BRE and the Environment Community of Practice, looking at the Shelter Materials LCA tool, which I understand incorporates some packaging materials at the moment and potentially could include others in the future. WFP are going to be conducting an LCA of one of their main food packaging items, but we certainly would like to extend this to looking at non-food items as well. And there's potentially some funding that could be explored from USAID and also from ECHO in their call, their ERC HIP being published soon. There should be something in there on this topic. So if there is interest in applying for that with some of the other partners, then please do let us know. Then on the procurement side, we'll be looking at specification improvements for packaging of main relief items and thinking potentially about, proposing standard specifications, understanding the challenges that there are with that. Many partners, I'm sure many of yourselves included, have or are introducing specification improvements from an environmental perspective that can be shared across the sector. And I know that the cluster is also working on this as well, not only for packaging, but for commodities too. Then we'll also be looking at a packaging sustainability criteria list for tenders, tender contracts specifically. Danish Refugee Council will be leading this activity. Again, many partners are already working on this and can share their criteria and experience. I believe the cluster is also trying to incorporate sustainable procurement into tendering for manufacturers. So this could be of interest to participate in. And this will be starting sort of from this week onwards. On the design, production, and distribution side, we would like to look at some R&D to look at the design of some of the most common packaging products to increase sustainability, which may have some overlap with some of your plans for environmental impacts of NFIs. What these are and how many we look at will very much depend on our stakeholders' priorities and interests. There are, of course, existing initiatives looking at quite a few items already. For example, the polypropylene bags with ICRC, WFP, and UNHCR, etc. Yes, there's also potentially a possibility for leveraging some EU R&D funding on this from sort of later this year or early next year as well. And then finally, the end-of-life management side, which I'm sure is of interest. We are going to be doing some mapping of available waste management infrastructure in operating countries. The LSE study that Renee just mentioned, that was done by a group of students working with the UNEP OCHA Joint Environment Unit and with USAID, was looking at Iraq and Yemen. That's going to be presented next week at the HMPW, and I can share the link of that. But yes, we're interested in kind of expanding on that and looking at many more kind of priority contexts. We're in discussion with WFP about potentially leading that, and probably will start looking at sharing tools, processes, and data that's already being used to map this type of information. Very much tied to that is looking at guidance on market-based opportunities for secondary use of packaging. I think that this is also a topic which recent discussions with the cluster kind of highlighted as an area of interest. Ideally, we will design a methodology that can then be applied in other locations, as well as piloting solutions. And then finally, something that was raised as a priority by the environment community practice was looking at a catalog of packaging management tools and methods for field use. So to try and engage the field in solutions and match the needs with the various technological options, which are obviously evolving quite quickly, and allow kind of easier access to these solutions and incorporate them in response. So those are kind of the main activities coming out of our fairly extensive activity plan that I wanted to just highlight to you. Be really keen to hear, of course, if you have any questions or comments, but particularly if you have any ideas of where we could collaborate with this working group. Do you have ongoing activities that are already linked to the ones I presented? Would you be interested in joining some of our sub-working groups for certain activities as we take these forward? As I mentioned, there are different organizational partners leading the activities, and they'll be putting together these sub-working groups to take those activities forward over the course of the year. So I shall open the floor up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So yes, I think the number of these topics are relevant for the working group members, and I'm sure that so it would be great if you could share about the opportunities to join these sub-working groups, because even though if we ourselves as chairs can't go, I'm sure some of the partners would be valid contributors to that. And then, of course, like the NFI working group, we're powered by the contributions of initiatives such as this, and you already have realized some studies in contexts where we have active country clusters, so there's a lot of synergies there. Are there any questions or comments, quick comments, before I hand over? I know we're running short on time. The comments in the chat are still on the previous presentation. Okay, so perhaps if there's questions or comments, I'm sure we'll be in touch in subsequent working group meetings. But also I'll give your contact information to people, Mandy, so that they can reach out after the meeting as well. And then we'll also circulate the presentation that you shared so that if people have a thought afterwards, they can get in touch.
Thanks, that would be great. I can share also the full activity plan so that people can just take a look through in case that's helpful as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Yes.
I mean, this is Pablo, this will remain an open platform to share this kind of initiatives and engage with members of the working group or community of practice as we evolve. And perhaps if there is enough interest, we can organize specific activities like a workshop for a particular issue, like was presented earlier today on the naming of the grouping of items, and in this case, for other specific, these different opportunities for collaboration that you presented, Mandy. So it remains an open group to continue to bounce ideas and make progress together.
Great, thank you.
Great. All right, so now I'm going to turn over to the last presentation, which is Miguel. He's going to present some about the new project that we have on greening the response, which will involve a lot of our contributions as a NFI working group. So Miguel, please feel free to present.
Thank you, Rene. I'm not sure how much time I have. I think it's 10 minutes max.
Yes.
5. Okay.
So, but also we can share any presentations and then follow up with questions afterwards. So yes, really, it was quite a packed agenda today.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so I hope everyone can see the slide on the screen. I'm sharing the presentation. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so as you know, the Global Shelter Cluster has an environment community of practice, which has been very active for many years, actually. Charles Kelly is one of its longtime members, but also Mandy and others. So it's thanks to this community of practice, the Global Shelter Cluster has been involved in environment for a long time and has done a number of initiatives. So building up on those initiatives and some of the good work done by this environment community of practice, the Global Shelter Cluster presented a project to the emergency response capacity of ECHO with the objective of greening the shelter response. And we are in conversations with ECHO now to finalize that. It's very likely that we will receive the grant. So some key data on the project. It's fairly modest project. We are receiving around 650,000 euro from ECHO, and the remaining to get to almost 1 million is done through co-funding from the lead agencies and partners. As we did in the last 3 ECHO grants, UNHCR will receive the funding on behalf of the cluster, and then it will work with partners to pass through the corresponding amounts. So the project is relatively simple with 3 activities. Activity 1 is happening at the global level, and it's mainly about defining or greening the specifications of some of the key shelter products and some NFIs as well. These products, the idea is to green their specifications without losing performance. It's an ambitious task, but we believe that it's possible. And in fact, there are already initiatives going on in this sense. The second activity is about, it's happening at the global level, but is giving tools to country level clusters to be able to advance or to advocate for greener responses. And the third activity is about supporting country level clusters to make greener responses. It is a bit in detail. So activity 1, as I mentioned, where the idea is to promote greening of specifications and share those specifications. Also recycle and repurpose of some of the main shelter solutions, see how better deal with them once that they are used, disseminate the different energy options better, so that country level clusters and shelter practitioners know better which energy options are more appropriate, and even the possibility of having a decision-making tree that can help partners balance the different issues to take into consideration, from environment considerations to the cost, etc. The idea is also to develop a methodology to measure the CO2 equivalent of shelter interventions, and also the plastic footprint, so that can help partners make choices taking these considerations into account. And then finally, linking with particularly the global logistics cluster, but also with other clusters such as WASH, education, CCCM, and others. The second activity, it's mainly to develop environmental profiles. You have an example here of the first one that has been done for Bangladesh. So develop a few more and do advocacy on, or provide tools for advocacy for country level clusters. And the third one is similar to the first activity at the global level, but at country level. So it's supporting country level interventions, maybe through the use of well-designed market interventions using the cash champions that were started a few years ago. Continuing the work that has been going for a number of years on local building practices, identifying best local building practices and their sustainability, and then also support the identification of options for reducing, reusing, repurposing, and recycling of local shelter solutions. And then, continuing with these calculations, but at the country level for local solutions, and piloting initiatives, new initiatives that could be perhaps innovative on the use of environmental shelter responses. Here are some of the indicators. I think I'm not going to go into detail because even we are not fully finalized. I mean, we have proposed them to ECHO, but we're waiting for their feedback. This is a little bit of the budget. As you see, a big part of it will go to partners, more than 40%, 47% more or less. I mean, these numbers still need a bit of final approval from ECHO, but we're almost there. And these are the activities that will go to partners, you can see on the right. The way forward is basically once that we get the approval from ECHO, this will be communicated through a global update. We will define together with the partner, with the SAG, criteria to select partners, make a call for expressions of interest for those partners to implement those, and together with the SAG, select what are the partners based on the criteria, and then start working with the partners by transferring the funds and then monitoring the work. This is all from my side. If there are any questions or comments, happy to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Any comments or questions from the participants?
Hello, Mandy here. Sorry, just wanted to
Please go ahead.
Lots of great overlap, I think, particularly on the specification side and some of the kind of end-of-life management and recycling, repurposing, etc. that I think overlaps quite nicely with the packaging initiative as well. So looking forward to continue discussions on how we can coordinate on that on the way forward.
For sure, we will be in touch, Mandy, and we need to ensure that those complementarities and synergies excellent.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this particular initiative? Okay, I don't see any raised hands or anything in the chat. I'm just going to ask for all our speakers to please share your presentations with me so that, and then we will share them with all of you who attended the meeting and also with those of you subscribed to the mailing list. As Miguel and Mandy mentioned, there's going to be a lot of upcoming meetings or presentations or global updates about the things that we discussed today. So I'll also be sure to ask you speakers to share those with me so that I can share it with you as NFI working group members so that you can participate in the relevant events at the HNPW or at other platforms where they're taking place. I guess platforms is an appropriate description for our virtual world. And then also we will be in touch about the next steps for the NFI working group, whether it'll stay as NFI working group, whether it'll evolve into a community of practice. And then we also will be sharing the different action points, the different questions that we had. I think some interesting conversations were going on in the first presentation, so I'll also make sure that that conversation can continue even outside of the meeting platform. So many thanks to all of you for your participation today. So with this, I close the meeting and we will be in touch, and please subscribe to the NFI working group for other updates. And Pablo, do you want to add anything in closing?
No, thank you. Just wanted to put the camera, whoever can put the camera on just to say goodbye and see each other's face. Thank you very much for everyone to participate. And yeah, we will be in touch.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone. Great presentations. Take care. Have a good afternoon.